Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us today to have a discussion about what is the Interledger Protocol. And want to thank Max for taking the time to speak with us and share. And I'll turn it over to you, Max.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tiffany. Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. How do I go back? Sorry, one second. Let me figure out how to. You can see the
Yes.
just to put the slides, right? Okay, great. Mm, setting up. Okay. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Max. I'm technical lead at the ILF. I think there's a few of us here that are also joining from the broader community. Yeah, I want to talk today about the Interledger protocol, so I'll try to keep it pretty high level, and hopefully you'll yeah, even if you know about it before, maybe it'll be something new. So again, say that I'm a banker. I work at the Bank of Canada, and I have some, let's say, correspondence with somebody from. Oh,
Ya lo llamo.
hello. What?
Yeah. You're unmuted.
You can still see the screen, right? It's all good.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I have a correspondence with somebody from the Bank of US, and I, I have a client, and her name is Sophia, and she's sending funds back to her sister who is in the US. So of course, like any good technologist, I take her request and I give a pigeon some roll of cash. I give it to the pigeon, and the pigeon flies over to the Bank of US. Obviously, this is the natural choice, right? This is like very secure and very safe. But again, right, the pro of this way is that it's charming, right? We're sending money over pigeon. But the issue is that the pigeon has to carry the cash. Maybe I'm not sure if I want to trust that pigeon with cash. So how do we prevent that pigeon from having to carry cash? What I can do here is maybe instead of giving cash, I'll write down some on a note, to whom the money is for and for how much, right? So I put in the envelope, and I give the envelope to the pigeon, right? So we've solved, let's say, our little conundrum here of having to give the pigeon cash. But again, on the Bank of US side, right, when this pigeon arrives to their Bank of US needs to know what to do with that message, right? So how do they do that, right? So both banks, they must keep track of how much they owe each other, right? So one way of doing it is the Bank of Canada opens a USD account for the Bank of US, and correspondingly, Bank of US opens a USD account for the Bank of Canada. Now, whenever we're sending pigeons with these envelopes between the banks, Bank of Canada, all it needs to do is debit Sophia's account and then credit the Bank of US account, saying that the Bank of Canada is now owing the Bank of US, and then it sends over our pigeon. And likewise, when the pigeon comes, the Bank of US is going to receive the message, debit the Bank of Canada account, right, saying that, okay, we are now owed some money, and then Anna gets credited. So this is, we'll call our option, or this is the pigeon 2.0. This is our new way of sending money around. Well, I guess we kind of have a problem here, right? Like, how do we actually move the cash in this scenario? Well, I'd like to introduce another great technology. We can just send horse and carriage 1 time a week between the two banks. The Bank of Canada is basically going to send a horse and carriage to the US. And, it's much safer than with a pigeon, as has been proven, right? That horses and carriages, it's much more safer to send funds across. Okay, great. So what we've done here, right? We've separated how we send over financial messages versus how we actually move the funds. And okay, so time goes on, and then Sophia comes to me with a question of, okay, well, my sister Anna, she's moved to Mexico. Um, so I tell her, okay, well, I mean, sorry, we can't really send you money. We don't have anybody to do. We don't know how to interact with the Bank of Mexico. We've never done business with them. But let me see what I can do. So I call over somebody from the Bank of US, and they say, okay, great, yeah, we actually do business with Bank of Mexico all the time. No problem. Let me um, mm, yeah, it's great. It's a bit strange that I called her over the phone, somebody from Bank of US, even though we use pigeons for money, but that's besides the point. Anyway, right. So now I come back to Sophia and tell her, okay, great. We can do that. We can give money to the Bank of Mexico. We can use Bank of the US. So what do I need to do now? So I take the funds, right? I take money from Sophia. I'll tell her I'm debiting you. I'll create the Bank of the US account at my bank, and I'll send a message to the Bank of US. So here, right, we both open USD accounts, right? So I can send envelope to the Bank of US via Pigeon, and Bank of US will know how to do with it, right? So they just need to open the envelope, debit the Bank of Canada account, and they'll send in, they do what they've been doing on their side, right? They're gonna just keep, they're gonna make a new envelope, right? They'll send an updated message with their currency, right? In this case, it's pesos, right? The amount has changed, and they'll credit the Bank of Mexico account on their side. What Bank of Mexico needs to do is just open the envelope and then debit the Bank of US on their side and credit Anna. So great, right? We have a system of being able to send money between Sophia and Anna, even though they're on different banks, completely different countries. And we're still sending horse and carriages every week between Bank of Canada. And it turns out for some reason, it's been a proven technology, and Bank of US is also sending horse and carriages between themselves and Bank of Mexico 1 time a week. So question here is, right, how do the banks know that the pigeon actually got to the place that where it's destined to? Well, how can we improve the system, right? The pigeons are flying. Can we make the system better? So, right, when maybe if the pigeon has to fly to Bank of Mexico already, why don't we just have the pigeon come back saying that we, saying that the money was there? Okay, great. So now the pigeon comes back from Bank of Mexico, back to Bank of US with a little check mark envelope saying that the message was delivered, and it goes back all the way to Bank of Canada. So now not only we're making the end journey of the pigeon also useful, where everybody's able to tell that the money has moved between all the different parties with no problem, right? And now we can also tell Sophia that Anna got her funds. So maybe another thing we can do here, right? Some pigeons maybe are a bit, not as fast as some other pigeons. Maybe what we can do is also add some expiry to our little note, right? So what this will happen, right, is if we have a little slower pigeon between the Bank of US and Bank of Mexico, Bank of Mexico can open the envelope, see that the pigeon arrived right late, don't have to do anything. They just see, okay, this pigeon is, sorry, you're not on time. And we'll send the pigeon back. We won't do any funds, we won't move any money. We'll just say, okay, just, sorry, but go back. So we'll give the pigeon a little envelope with a little cross. Likewise, Bank of US gets this pigeon. They're going to see, okay, right, I see that. Let me revert any changes I made because of my, first little late pigeon. I'll send it back, and I'll also send it back to Canada. And now let's say anything that's happened in the first, let's say, couple pigeon stops, we just undo everything that's happened before. Balances were unchanged completely. Even though we had one late pigeon, it's like nothing ever happened. So what if I told you that pigeon, or new like pigeon 3.0, is actually the Interledger protocol? So one thing to note here is that, yeah, and first things first, right? ILP isn't tied to any specific technology. So if you wanted to set up pigeons, this little pigeon network, then of course, by all means, feel free to do so. Of course, obviously, you're not going to be using real pigeons. That's as cool as that is and charming as it is. Typically we're still, ILP, we're still using existing internet technology. So let's say the HTTP, TCP, normal stuff. Another thing to note here is that, ILP isn't concerned about how funds are moved and how we settle funds, right? We can use horse and carriages if we really want to. And then ILP, right, in this envelopes is, right, we use ILP packets as the data format. So they're like, these little envelopes are the basic building blocks of ILP. We have three different types of packets, right? We have the prepare, fulfill, reject. So if we're going back to our previous example, we have, a sender, right? In our case, this is the Bank of Canada. We have a connector, somebody's in the middle, the Bank of US, and we have the receiver, the Bank of, in this case, the Bank of Mexico. So in our case, let's say, first pigeon stops, they're actually the prepare packets. We have let's say, returning pigeon with a checkmark envelope as the fulfilled packet, and then if whatever errors or something happens, right, we have the pigeon with a cross being the reject packet. These packets, like envelopes, right, they can hold really any kind of data. So we're not limited to, it's flexible in what the data that these envelopes can hold. So instead of just having, for example, like in our first example, to amount and expiry, right, we can just as easily add some sort of data to these envelopes, to these packets. One thing to note here is that packets do have conditions attached to them. So one thing that you'll see in all the prepare packets is we have a condition which gets sent to the final recipient, and only they can decode. And then likewise in the fulfill packets, we get back information and only the sender can decode. So this is kind of a way to ensure that it actually, the person or the entity for which the original sender sent the money to can actually say that it was delivered in fact to the final recipient. And the basic protocol allows building additional products on top of it. So if you've heard of something called stream, it sort of reuses this data field in different packets to actually encrypt data that only the sender can encrypt data that only the receiver can encode, and vice versa. It's kind of how the condition works, but now in this case is data, and some other stuff is there. So the stream protocol is one of these things that, let's say, builds on top of the basic building blocks of the ILP. ILP uses ILP addresses to specify destination. So in our example, we have these three different entities that would actually have things like ILP addresses, like something like this. So the entities, it's up to the entity to determine what the address looks like, but maybe for our case example, it'd be something like this, where you have some global identifier and then an establishment, and then maybe some account specifier like Sophia. And in the protocol, it's the responsibility of the connectors to determine how to route packets based on that destination address. So if the Bank of US is in our case still remains the connector and receives a packet something like this to a destination with the Bank of Colombia in there with a certain account identifier, it's responsibility, the connectors, the Bank of US, to, instead of sending it to Mexico like the other time, you would send it to Colombia. So that's the responsibility of the connector. And the final thing, I guess I wanted to just clarify and really make known is that ILP simply outlines a set of rules for how these participants and these ASCs should behave in a network. And yeah, that's really the core of the Interledger protocol, disregarding all the kinds of technology, anything extra to come along with it. And yeah, this is going to be short, but yeah, I hope that was
Yeah, thank you,
That was it.
Max. Thanks so much for sharing. We do have some questions already. And again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat or in the document if you have access to the document. First question we have is, what data is sent in the request and response of each step? And
So
go ahead.
yeah, that really, again, it really depends up to um, the configuration between the peers. So it could be anything. It could be it could be information about like an invoice. It could be information about um, yeah, it could be information like KYC or AML, stuff they use for KYC AML checks even, right, between institutions. It's really flexible in terms of the protocol itself just allows you to put anything in these packets.
Okay, cool. Next question is, how can regulated financial institutions adopt ILP while complying with KYC, AML, CTF requirements for all institutions involved in a transaction to know the sending and receiving party's identity?
Yeah, basically, um, it's really up to, again, using the basic like building blocks of ILP, you could put information, yeah, any sort of information in those packets. So as the connector, you could take that information, do any sort of checks on it. You're not, yeah, you can. It's very flexible in what you put there. So it really depends on to the configuration between the different peers as to what is required in each step.
Okay. And Stephanie, just to answer your question, yes, this is being recorded.
Yeah, and Stephanie, I can answer that as well. So the money, I guess I mean, in terms of how money is actually being transferred, it really like it could be anything. It could be, um, of course, in our case, right? We have like our own, so our let's say implementation of that is Rafiki, where it just uses basic like HTTP response request protocol like in normally you would in on the web. Um, but yeah, that is just a version of how we choose to just to do it in at the ILF.
Okay. And the next question is, how is the cost of a transaction determined?
The so for example, if we go back to the example between the three banks, so the fact that the Bank of Mexico, right, it had to hold both currencies in a way, right? It had to know about US dollars, it had to know about, sorry, Bank of US, it had to know multiple currencies. In that case, right, it could, when it, packages up a new envelope and with a different amount that the receiver will get, then they can choose to apply a fee based on what they see fit. So obviously, um, that fee can, usually if you're interacting between the same currency, typically you won't get a lot of fees like anything else, like any other, let's say, uh, banking, but they could choose to extract some sort of fee out of it for their services in terms of, right, but then that kind of ties in with routing, right? Um, if you want to be able to be a receiver that gets routed to more frequently, then maybe you would keep your costs low because it's incentivized um, to still take some sort of fee, but then maybe you can reduce fees across the whole, let's say, transaction chain, and thus sort of bring down the cost for all the participating entities.
Okay. Um, I guess like whoever had that question, like, was that clear enough of, or would you like more clarification around that? Nope. Okay. Next question is, how does IOP make a payment faster, and how does IOP make a payment cheaper?
So, I mean, typically it would, right, if the infrastructure is pretty, you're not processing a lot of information, right? If you're running say these ILP servers that are receiving packets, you can really, um, as part of the banking infrastructure, it's really up to you how like performing you can make it, right? If you place it, um, let's say, if you add some sorts of like different optimizations for it, right? You're not like at the how do I say? You're not at the whims of like a big corporation, right? That or like a centralized server, say like Swift, right? Which would have to receive messages, process them, route them to the different correspondent banks, and you know, yeah, you don't have to everything go through a centralized infrastructure, right? So if you have individual small components that are sitting at each institution, you could, for example, just try to optimize it as much as possible, and then as the overall scale, it might be quicker than different networks like Swift. And what was the other part of that question? Cheaper, or was that it, Tiffany?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
cheaper.
think it's more like network effect, right? If you have um, as the connector, so as the intermediary, you have incentive to have more business, quote unquote, right? By having more packets go through you, flow through you. So you would want to not have a lot of cost, right? Because then nobody would be willing to have you as like an intermediary in the transaction. So in that way, yeah, you could reduce like the overall cost down.
Okay. Next question, which we've already addressed this like just in the example or a little bit, but if you can touch more bases on it. What is the role of connectors in IOP?
They they just, I mean, the role of them is to route packets and then have, um, I mean, that's the main role to be able to receive packets. Connectors can also be receivers, right? You don't, as a, you can have, it's not like say exclusive or, right? You can have, if you receive some sort of packet, you can see, oh, if it's destined to me, then, I know that's the final destination. I'll do what I need to do, credit my, end user and then send the packet back. Or if when I see the prepare packet with a different destination address that's not mine, then I can choose to forward it on. So just, in summary, just the connector's role is to route packets to the different entities that the connector has relationships with, and that holds, corresponding accounts between each other.
Okay. And Stephanie had a statement, I think, addressing this. So she said the Bank of Canada might be issuing a digital currency and is likely to have private channels with the other country banks. The financial transfer, excuse me, in those cases is likely to be out of band. She said, correct. Is that the case?
Yeah, it could be anything, right? You could do all this messaging in ILP, and then your settlement doesn't have to be horse and carriage, but you would transfer it like you would settle using your private channels. So it really depends how you want to set that up, but yeah, that's separate from the messaging aspect of it. Yeah, it's what Jeremiah said. Basically, the settlement can be, you know, as you know, right, it's completely up to the jurisdiction and depends on the region where you are. So there's lots of different settlement agreements. And yeah, that kind of ILP doesn't say anything about how you should settle. It's done, yeah, externally.
Okay. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thanks. And I hate to ask so many questions and take up time, but to me, this is the big question about how we're actually helping poor people, because poor people have a hard time getting into these channels where the settlement layer is actually taking place. In other words, if they don't have bank accounts, then they can't send money home to the country where they want to send it to. And same thing, if the recipient is too poor to have a bank account or too I use the word undesirable. I hope you don't think I mean that in a human rights sense, but is being squeezed out of financial interactions by the country they're in, then you can't settle, right? Or am I wrong?
It's true, and you need to have some sort of some way to settlement channel. I think, right, if yeah, I think in terms of like digital wallets, banks, right, you don't have to be part of like a big network like Swift, right, to be able to transact or at least send messages. Um, but yeah, and it's kind of ILP's goal is just to make that, let's say, standard connection for messaging, and anyone can run it. It's open source, um, it's open, but yeah, there needs to be some sort of, let's say, settlement mechanism in place, wherever that may be, whether that's like fiat, whether that's stablecoin, anything like this, to between, let's say, the two transferring institutions. So yeah, um, you need that sort of piece of it, absolutely. Or you like, but then again, that can be completely up to the two like digital wallet providers, for example. Um, but yeah, it's a difficult piece, and I think it's hard to, let's say, even have like a recommendation or a technological solution to do something that is really, you know, is really contextual, I think.
The problem that I see looking at this from the data protection side is that with the increasing pressure on identification, I still don't understand exactly what the outsourced KYC companies are providing in the way of verification of recipient and sender. I know what the rules are, but are they actually following them, and how much identity and identification are they doing? In some cases, some countries want to see a passport or a birth certificate or a biometric, and that is only going to get ratcheted up. That's the same kind of data that you need to get a bank account. So these two vectors are going to cross, and doesn't that put a lot of pressure on? I mean, yes, you can still use stable coins, and you could set up companies that will take the risk and use them as a settlement layer, I guess. But it ain't PayPal that's gonna eat the bad debt, right?
Max, before you answer that question, I know we're coming up to time and just wanted to check and see if you had a little extra time, to answer some more questions before we continue.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. So if anyone has to leave, we'll still have the recording available. Okay. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, I think that's a tough tough one, Stephanie. I think it's yeah, I guess from that perspective, we can do only so much with like technology, right? But yeah, these are some valid concerns.
Okay. Next question we have is, how is the connector node route selection done via IOP? Like, for example, how does a sender guarantee that they never use a connector node physically located in a sanctioned country like Russia or Iran?
Yeah, that's so the first part of that question is there's a few, let's say like yeah. First things first is like completely up to the connector. The um the typically you would have like some sort of ILP address, and then you would do like a longest prefix match on the address to see which entity it would route to. Um, so yeah, based on, yeah, first part of that question is, yeah, you would do it based on the full ILP address that's received in the packet. As for the second one, to make sure that connectors don't route to um, specific entities that are sanctioned, I think, yeah, that is an interesting problem. I think like there would be nothing in the rules or saying that um, like there's no like centralized, let's say, um, entity that says you can't route to so and so. Again, that would be up to the jurisdiction of the entity. If you're licensed and you do business in some certain place, then it'd probably be best for your interest not to route through sanctioned countries. But yeah, that really depends on the makeup of the network and the peering agreements between the individual entities. So as the sender, there isn't how to say there isn't a nothing like stated. There's nothing in the rules about how some part of the chain would route to a particular node.
Okay. And do you see a way for IOP to interface with ISO 20022, or would there be advantages or disadvantages to doing so?
Yeah, that's there's a few ways of doing that. So like yeah, I mean one setup could be like I wouldn't say it's like I wouldn't say ILP is direct, let's say um not competitor, but like in the similar vein as ISO or like ISO 222, it's you would, for example, maybe you would have all these messaging between the different entities using ILP, and then you could, for example, if your process is settling between banks using Swift, well, not settling, but finalizing let's say, the movement of funds, um, some, through Swift, and then obviously, and Swift doesn't do settlement, but like uh, the actual, let's say, banking settlement part of it, then maybe ISO 222 is involved in that process in terms of actually moving the money across. So you could, yeah, it's more like complementary, like if it's still part of your process as a bank to use that message format, then you probably just continue on using it in your cases, and you would use like maybe ILP for, yeah, sort of as a complementary to it.
Okay. Um, Jeremiah, did you have any follow-up questions to that? Okay. All good? All right. Okay, so next question, does IOP typically use normal PKI to establish trust relationships?
So you could, um, the peering, let's say, mechanism, or like the security mechanism between the nodes is up to the peers. So yeah, whether that's sharing like some sort of bearer token, you could use yeah, PKI between. That's typically also common and used. So however tools you use to authenticate is up to the actual peering mechanism. So for example, in Rafiki, you would essentially have like some sort of pre-shared yeah, structure like key with the other connector, and that's just one way of doing this authentication across peers.
Okay. Let's see. Where can we find a list of partner institutions already connected to the network? So in a similar vein, what are common routes? So like Canada, US, Mexico, in this example, already set up.
I would say if you want like to chat to our team, maybe shoot them an email or a Slack, and then they can help you if that's set up let's say those connections. I think, yeah, in the future we'll obviously hoping to have more. But yeah, I think that's yeah, if you like to know more, I guess you can talk to our team and they can help you.
Okay. And who specifically should they address it to? Um,
Maybe you could send it in the Interledger community Slack. I think that would be a good place to start. And one of our team's mates could help you.
those general channel. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. And let's see, last question on here is that how can IOP work with mobile money?
If yeah, it's if the institution that's providing the mobile money infrastructure, they could also do the, let's say, the messaging between the different mobile money providers using ILP. That's entirely possible, right? So it just depends how between who you want to, let's say, transact with as another mobile money provider, and yeah, make the connection using ILP versus other standards. But yeah, that's up to again the two different entities that are paired together.
Okay, let's see. Are there any final questions that anyone have for Max about the IOP? Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, not to open up a can of worms, but what we're really talking about is a series of faster messaging protocols. And the logical way to save those is on a ledger, encrypted. In fact, it's the only way because you don't want stuff sitting around about financial payments in the clear, right? So, I mean, Interledger, I think, spends some time saying we're not about cryptographic ledgers, but in fact, the only way to do this in a secure way with all these different partners would be to set up ledgers. Now, there's a difference, of course, because the currency's not on the ledger. I get that. But it's hard to explain that to someone who's going, well, you guys are just another bunch of cryptocurrency guys. Or am I crazy? Feel free to say so. I may not be getting
And
the basics here.
I mean, is it more so? Well, I guess what do you mean by the question there?
And well, I mean, how do you explain to someone who doesn't understand anything about financial payments that you are not like the cryptocurrency folks or the stablecoin folks who are dealing in money? Because you're not, you're only dealing in communications. By not being part of the settlement layer, it's just internet communications that ought to be encrypted at the highest level. And the way to do that, because you're talking about moving money, is on a ledger, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think for us, especially working with entities that are licensed, right? Again, um, it's about, of course, we can give our own recommendations about how they should set up their accounting and ledger, make sure that it's secure from that perspective, right? Because all of the ASC, there's nothing that we provide that is, yeah, we don't provide like ledgers to people, right? To have, I guess we keep track of the accounting that happens between the two different ILP nodes, right? And that's done, um, and that's like done in, for example, a Rafiki, right? But the actual implementation of the ledger at those financial institutions would be, yeah, hopefully done in the best practice, especially if they're regulated. Yeah, about not storing like plain text info and all of this information. Um, of course, if you're a license, you have some checks and balances involved. So in terms of actual ledger, yeah, we can just say, you know, follow the best industry practices. Yeah,
But if you are operating a wallet, then you step over the line and you become involved in the actual transfer.
absolutely. Yeah. But then, yeah, in terms of ILP, it's yeah, it's not about storing or anything. It's about yeah, how those communication flows. But yeah, as the wallet, yeah, that would be a separate, let's say, um, product. I mean, yeah, the wallet would support ILP, and of course, it would store its own data as it needs to securely. So, but yeah, not necessarily the storage of, say, individual entries of the ledger aren't, let's say, ILP specific or aren't tied to ILP.
Mm. Thank you, and sorry for so many questions.
That's
That's
good.
very
Thank you,
interesting.
Stephanie.
Thank you. Yep. Any last questions before we close out for today? Okay. All right. Thank you again, Max, and thank you all for joining us today for this Lunch and Learn session. And we hope you all enjoyed it, and it will be uploaded to YouTube so you can watch again later or share. And thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for the questions.